Hi, how's everyone doing? Awesome. So today we're going to be doing a little lesson on fractions. They're all around us and they're super important to understand. They'll also be showing up in a lot of the ACT tests that you'll be taking. So we're really going to focus on our objective today, which is really looking at the foundation of fractions, how do we represent them, what are they, and then moving on to how to add them, subtract them, divide them, and multiply them. So we can get started right away. So what exactly is a fraction? So a fraction is a part of a whole. They can be represented in a lot of different areas within our lives. A big one is money. So think of a dollar, and then you have all these coins underneath the dollar. So all of those coins represent a fraction of that dollar. So let's look at a quarter. So when you have a quarter, you have 1/4 of that dollar because it takes 4 quarters to make up the whole dollar. So you can see it there. Now let's look at 2 quarters. So if you have 2 quarters, you have 2 of that 4 parts. So looking at 2/4 there. You can also reduce that into 1/2. We'll get into that a little bit later on how to reduce them and all of that. But that's kind of the area that we're looking at. So we can also they can also be represented within the fruit system too. So has anybody eaten an orange? Awesome. So when you peel it, you see that it's divided into a lot of parts, sometimes 8 parts or slices. So when you eat 2 slices, you have 2 out of the 8 slices that make up that whole. So you can represent that as 2/8 of that orange. So now that we kind of have that understanding, let's move on to a little bit of the basics. So like we said, fractions are a part to a whole relationship. So we represent fractions in 2 parts. You heard me talking about 1/4, 2/8, so this is what we're going to be looking at right now. We have a numerator that goes on top, which is the part, and then we have the denominator, which goes on bottom, which is what makes up the whole. So when we said we ate 2 of the 8 slices, we can represent that as 2/8. You can think of it a little bit as dividing there, which is a little bit easier to understand there. So let's look at your workbook, and we can see that they have an example of a pizza there. It doesn't have to be a pizza. It can be a pie, it can be an orange, whatever you like. If you don't like sweets or if you don't like savory stuff, that kind of feeling there. So they say that you have 1 slice of the pizza and it's broken up into 8 slices. So how would you represent that as a fraction? Perfect, it would be 1/8. So now let's take it to say that you have the 8 slices and then you grab 2 of those. How do you represent that? 2/8. So a lot of the times you'll see a lot of these fractions represented in really big numbers on tests or in real life. And then the answer, or what you're looking for, is a little bit easier to understand, but it doesn't quite match up with the big number. What they did there is that they reduced the fraction, so made it a little bit more simpler to understand there. So let's take that 2/8 that we were talking about when you grab the two pizza slices out of the 8 slices. So how can we reduce that? Awesome. So yeah, you find a common factor between the numerator and the denominator there. So in this case, 2/8, 2 goes into 2 once, so you can replace the 2 with the 1, and then 2 goes into 8 4 times, which would be, so you can represent the 8 as a 4. So 2/8 is equivalent, or is equal to 1/4 there. So a lot of the times I feel a little bit weird reducing just because it was a little bit hard for me. But when I start to reduce, I always look to see if it can be reduced by the factor 2. If it can't be, then we look at 3, 4, 5, and so on. Another trick that I like to use is really looking at the numerator and denominator and seeing if they're either odd or even. If they're even, then they're probably going to be able to be reduced by an even number there. So that's just a little trick that I like to use there. So let's look at the book. Like they said, on that bottom of that first page, they say that you have 6/8. So what they did here is that they reduced it to 3/4. So we have to remember that whatever you do on top, you have to do on bottom. So they divided that 6 by the 2 and that 8 by the 2. So 6/8 is equivalent to 3/4. All right, that's all the time that we have right now. But I look forward to learning more with you and teaching more. So